Please listen. The Spirit wanted me to play this for you.
This. He says in verse 11, "Wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh." Are we still Gentiles? No. You were in time past Gentiles. You're called uncircumcision, but actually through the blood of Christ, you've been brought nigh unto Israel. You're a citizen of Israel. You're a part of Israel. How can anyone read Ephesians 2 and not realize that we are citizens of Israel? That's what it says. When you were without Christ, you're a foreigner to Israel. Now you're made nigh unto Israel through the blood of Christ. Now you're a citizen of Israel. Now there's a bunch of people over in Israel today that call themselves citizens of Israel. I say they're a bunch of foreigners over there. A bunch of strangers and aliens. Why? Because they're not made nigh by the blood of Christ. In God's eyes, they're not of Israel because they don't believe in Jesus Christ. Those natural branches have been broken off. And we've been grafted in as the Gentiles. But think about this now. In order to immigrate into Israel, now this is really important. In order to immigrate to Israel, you can't just be anybody and just immigrate into Israel. You can't just, for example, be a Mexican and say, I want to just go to Israel. Right? You can't just be of Chinese and just say, I want to immigrate to Israel. You can't be just an American and just say, I want to immigrate to Israel. No. In order to immigrate from Israel, you have to be able to prove that you're Jewish in order to immigrate to Israel today. Now, you can be someone of a different ethnicity and immigrate into Israel, but you would have to convert to Judaism, which involves renouncing Christ. In order to convert to Judaism, we spoke to several rabbis, and you have to renounce Jesus Christ. You cannot believe that Jesus is the Messiah. You cannot believe that He's the Son of God. So in order to become a citizen of Israel today, you either have to prove that you're Jewish, of Jewish blood, or you have to renounce the Lord Jesus Christ. So there are two ways to immigrate to Israel. Have Jewish ethnicity or deny Jesus and join the religion of Judaism. It's a very rigorous conversion process. It takes about a year and a half of just, bowing down unto the rabbis and, doing whatever they say or whatever. So anyway, I'm not really interested in it. So I don't have all the details. But anyway, let me just explain to you how ridiculous this is. To say, you have to prove that you're Jewish. You have to prove that you're of Israel. Then we'll let you immigrate. And it's called the right of return. Now, they won't accept DNA. And I'm going to explain to you why in a moment. They will not accept DNA. You could go to a DNA lab and prove that you're related to them. And prove that you're descended from the same Jews that they're descended from. They will not accept that. You have to be certified by them, by the rabbis, by their Jewish community. They'll certify whether you're Jewish or not. DNA, which has been scientifically proven to be accurate, which has been used to convict all kinds of criminals of the death penalty and to exonerate and let other people go free because it is so accurate, they won't accept it. And I'm going to show you why in a moment. Because if they accepted it, it would prove everything that they believe to be a fraud. Now let me explain this chart to you that I've drawn over here. I want to go over this with you. But first let me read for you from 1 Timothy. Now I've already proven that we're spiritually of Israel, right? That we're spiritually Jews, according to Romans 2, Philippians 3, and Ephesians 2. That's pretty easy to prove from the Bible. We could turn to many other scriptures. But listen to me, I'm about to really blow you away tonight. And I don't say that very often. And I'm about to make a really big promise. And I'm going to deliver on that promise. And when I first make this promise, many of you are not going to believe that I'm able to do what I say I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to promise to do something, and many of you are going to not believe that I'm able to fulfill what I'm going to guarantee you. But let me tell you something. I will deliver. Okay? And I don't say that lightly. Just hear me out. Okay? Have I proven that we're spiritually the sons of Abraham? I mean, I've done that in many other sermons. Have I proven that we're of Israel? We've been brought nigh into Israel. We're citizens of Israel. Spiritually. Listen to me tonight. You're not going to believe me, but when I'm done, you will see it. I'm going to prove to you tonight that you are a physical descendant of Abraham. I'm going to prove it to you tonight. I'll go a step further. I am going to prove to you tonight that you are physically descended from Israel himself. Not even just of Ishmael or Midian. I'm going to prove to you tonight that you have physically descended from Israel. You say, I'm black. I'll prove it to you. You say, I'm Chinese. I'll prove it to you. I'm Korean. I'll prove it to you. I'm white. I'll prove it to you. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. Pastor Anderson's out of his mind. There's no way he can prove that. Look, when I'm done tonight, the only people who will disagree with me are just people who don't understand science and math. No scientist will disagree when I'm done tonight. No mathematician will disagree when I'm done. That you, well, surely you don't mean me, I mean you, are descended physically from Israel. Not spiritually, physically. Let me step over to the board here. I know it's a tall order. It's a big promise. Okay? But let me explain to you. Now, this is something that I actually learned when I traced my family tree. And when I figured out how this worked, this blew my mind. This blew me away. And I learned this about 5, 6, 7 years ago when I was tracing my own ancestry and my family tree. And I want you to pay very close attention because this is going to involve math. And so I want you to pay very careful attention. I'm going to explain this to you and make it as simple as I can. Okay, this is what a family tree looks like. Who's ever made a family tree before? Lots of people, great. Now, at the bottom of this family tree, we just have one person. These circles represent people. So at the bottom of the family tree, we just have one person, which is you. Now, you descend from two people, don't you? Your mother and your father. So if we go back one generation, you come from two people as a direct descendant, right? But if we go back another generation, you don't just have two grandparents, you have four grandparents. And it keeps doubling, doesn't it? Because you have two parents, four grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and you have 32 great-great-great-grandparents. Everybody follow so far? And it keeps doubling because everybody has two parents. Okay? So, we're going to use exponents tonight. Okay? Exponents will help us understand this because we started with one person, right? That's 2 to the 0th power equals 1. Alright? Then, in the first generation, we go back. We're going back one generation. Going back to mom and dad. We have two parents, which is 2 to the 1st power. When we go back 2 generations to our grandparents, we have 2 squared, or 2 to the 2nd power, which is 4. 4 grandparents, right? If we go back 3 generations, we have 8 great-grandparents. That's 2 to the 3rd power. 4 generations, it's going to be 2 to the 4th power, 16. 2 to the 5th power, 32. 2 to the 6th power, 64. So the number keeps doubling, doesn't it? Now, that means if I were going to do a family tree that went back 5 generations, I would have to have a piece of paper wide enough to where at the top of that paper I'd be able to have 32 people's names, wouldn't I? Because that's how many ancestors I'm going to have directly in that 5th generation. Now, if I went to the 6th generation, my paper is going to have to be twice as wide because now I'm going to have 64 slots to put in names, right? Now, our parents are 2 different people. Our grandparents are 4 different people. Our great-grandparents are 8 different people. Now, how could we have, 3 grandparents? It'd be like a guy with 2 wives and people are marrying their half-sister. It'd be a mess. Okay? So these people are all unique people. If I made a family tree like this, these would all be unique names. All unique people. All different people. Not like that song, I'm My Own Grandpa. About living in the South and so forth. But anyway, so have you ever heard that song? But anyway, so anyway, a normal family tree, going back 5 generations, all the names are pretty likely to be unique. And I've done my family tree to this level, and the names are all unique. It's all unique people, because there are a lot of fish in the sea. A lot of people in the world, right? Well, what happens, though, is that as we go back further, this number gets really big. Now, in order to understand how this chart works, we have to understand how long a generation is. Now, a generation has nothing to do with the lifespan. Okay? For example, my mother gave birth to me when she was 30 years old. Okay? Most women give birth to children around that age. You know, the childbearing time would be pretty much between 20 and 40 these days. So it would be the primary time that women are giving birth. So let's just take 30 as an average. My mom was 30 when she had me. If you go online and type in how long is a generation, the number that keeps coming up over and over again is 25, 25, 25. You know, sometimes you'll see 30, sometimes you'll see 20, 20 something. But let's just, 30 is a nice round number, and 30 is a very conservative number for this calculation, okay? So a generation is 30 years, meaning, you know, somebody has a child when they're 30, and then they have a child when they're 30, they have a child when they're 30. Nothing to do with lifespan. Okay. So that means that if we go back 10 generations, and a generation is 30 years, then that's 300 years, right? Yep. So let's just round off and say that if we went back in our family tree about 10 generations, we're going to be about the year 1700. Does that make sense, everybody? About 300 years ago. Now, because our family tree is getting wider, if we wanted to do a complete family tree showing all of our ancestors back to the 10th generation, we would have to have a piece of paper that was wide enough to have 1,024 slots. Because 10 generations ago, there would be 1,024 people that we would directly descend from, right? Because it's going 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1,024 when we get to the 10th generation. Now, here's what I noticed when I did my family tree, though. When I went back 10 generations, you know what I started noticing? These are no longer unique people. Why? Because people marry their... Don't you hate it when you accidentally marry your 7th cousin and you didn't even know that she was such a close relative? You know, obviously you don't know. I mean, who here can name their 3rd cousins? Who even knows what a 3rd cousin is, you know? But anyway, basically this is what a cousin is. A cousin is the people that you share your grandparents with. You share the same grandparents, right? A 2nd cousin is somebody that you share great-grandparents with. Okay, so for example, the children of cousins are 2nd cousins. The children of 2nd cousins are 3rd cousins. The children of 3rd cousins are 4th cousins. So you don't have to understand all that. But what I want you to understand is that by the time I got to the 10th generation here, these 1,024 people were not all unique because there had been some intermarriage in that 300 years that had unknowingly taken place. Let's go back 20 generations. So now we're back around the year 1400. Well, if I wanted to have a complete family tree, I would have to have a piece of paper that could fit 1,048,576 names. That's a pretty big piece of paper.
Yep.
It's an unbelievably sized piece of paper. Now, do you think all of these people are going to be unique? Maybe not, right? Okay. Now, let me just show you the scripture. I'm going to come back to that chart. Just digest that for a minute. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 1. In 1 Timothy chapter 1, it says in verse 4, "Neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies." I want you to keep that phrase in your mind. Endless genealogies, which minister questions rather than godly edifying, which is in faith, so do. Now in Titus, he just said avoid genealogies. But here he says to avoid endless genealogies. Now I'm going to show you why genealogies are endless. They truly are endless. So in the year 1400, if I'm going to trace all of my ancestors, I'm going to tell you who all of my ancestors from the 1400s are, I would have to show you a family tree that just at the top would have 1,000,000 some people, just in the top row, let alone everything else coming downward, right? If I were to go back 30 generations, now I'm only in the year 1100. I'm not even close to the time of Christ yet, am I? No. If I went back to the year 1100, 30 generations, I would have 1,073,741,824 ancestors in that generation. Now, listen, they're not all unique. And let me tell you why. There were not 1 billion people living in the world at that time. So there's a lot of repeating going on, right? You know what that shows? That a lot of people are descending from the same people. Right. Cannot help but intermarry. It's impossible not to because of these numbers. Now, but look, the real number that we want to go back to is not 1100 AD. Let's go back to 70 AD, because 70 AD is when all the Jews were scattered into all nations. And they were scattered into all nations. Okay? If we were to go back to 70 AD, and we were to have a family tree that shows all of our ancestors in 70 AD and how they're connected, that top line would have 18 quintillion, 446 quadrillion, 744 trillion names from 70 AD. Now, who thinks that there were 18 quintillion, 446 quadrillion, 744 trillion people living at the time of Christ? Or shortly thereafter? No. In fact, the approximate population at that time was 200 million on this earth. Okay? Of that 200 million, let's just call 7 or 8 million Jews. You say, I don't like that number. Well, that number's not going to matter in a minute. Okay? So let's just call it 7, 8 million. Okay? So if there are 200 million people on the earth at the time of the temple being destroyed, in 70 AD there are 200 million people on the earth, and about 7 or 8 million of them are Jews, that means if I have an ancestor from that era, there's a 1 in 27 chance that they were of Israel. That's not even counting all the mixing that could have taken place up to that point. But let's just use this number. Let's just say 1 in 27 people living at that time are descendants of Israel. And let's say that, 200 million is the population of the earth. So basically, each of my ancestors has a 1 in 27 chance of being of Israel. Does everybody understand? Okay. How many slots am I filling in on that family tree? 18 quintillion slots, right? So think about this. What if I were buying a lottery ticket, and the odds of that lottery ticket coming up a winner are 1 in 27? Does everybody understand?